Hello and welcome to Dialogue. The Japanese government has convened the first meeting of an expert panel to begin revising three of its most important security documents: the National Security Strategy, the National Defense Strategy, and the National Defense Buildup Program. The move marks the latest step in Japan's accelerating defense shift, following months of rising military spending, expanded security cooperation, and changes to its arms export policies. So what is driving the revision of these key strategies? Is Japan laying the groundwork for a further military build-up? And could this long-standing no-introduction principle on nuclear weapons come under review? Join us for discussion today, live from Beijing. I'm Xu Qinduo. Joining me today are Yang Xiyu, Senior Fellow from the China Institute of International Studies, Herman Laurel, President of the Asian Century Philippines Strategic Studies Institute, and Warwick Powell, Adjunct Professor from Queensland University of Technology. So, Xiyu, I will start with you. You know, the Japanese government took the step to convene this panel to revise these three key security documents, but these documents were already updated as recently as 2022, 4 years ago. So first of all, could you briefly explain what these documents are and why they are back under the spotlight at this moment?
Well, the three key documents compose the fundamental framework for Japanese defense policy and doctrines, ranging from the strategic level to technical level, following the three documents. The documents, during the past, the three documents guaranteed Japan went along with the pacifist path. But since 2022, the then Japanese administration made a fundamental revision about the three documents, simply saying revision the documents for Japan's the so-called self-defense forces from the self-defense towards the forces composed with both defense and offense capabilities. So since then, a further development has happened, just like something like salami slice tactics. As you earlier mentioned, they sharply increased the military spending and they revised their arms control policies and so on. With the new developments, then the current administration will make further efforts to further revise the three key documents for further remilitarization. So that is the current situation happening in Tokyo.
Mm-hmm. Well, Warwick, basically these three documents define how Japan assesses threats, builds its military, and how does it plan its defense spending. Revising them is not just a technical update, it is a way to push Japan's defense policy further toward long-term war readiness and a more capable military posture. Japanese Prime Minister Sana Takaichi claimed that Japan must secure sustainable combat capabilities and prepare for protracted warfare in light of the Ukraine crisis and the current situation in the Middle East. I would say, for layman's, perspective, there are no signs that, either Russia or the United States is going to launch a military operation against Japan, right?
Well, it's hard to see where the actual threat to Japanese national security is, and which leads one to conclude that, in fact, this adjustment of posture, in fact, a radical militarization, laying the groundwork for a radical stepwise adjustment to its military capability, is less about defence and far more about becoming an active participant and possibly a proponent of conflict within the region itself. And this is taking place, Qinduo, against the backdrop of the United States and its own strategic orientation, which is to seek to firstly continue its strategic ambitions to contain China, and secondly, in recognition of its own material limitations, mobilise to the extent that it can the resources and risk appetite of allies across the world to fight America's wars. It looks like that the Takaichi administration is willing to be America's front line in Asia, and that's an unfortunate turn because Japan itself, of course, has a long history of militarisation, and as we speak today, we are on the cusp of recognising the 80th anniversary of the Tokyo trials, when Japanese militarism and aggression and war atrocities was actually put on trial by the world and actually exposed for what it is. And the Japanese have never fully atoned for what it did in the past, and it's little wonder that people across the region, not only in Beijing, but also in Korea and throughout Southeast Asia, should be alarmed by this move by the Japanese, not to boost its defences, but to make itself more ready to become a war-fighting nation once again.
Mr. Herman Laurel, we know that the mentor of Takaichi, the former Japanese Prime Minister, Shinzo Abe, once aimed to make his country, Japan, a more assertive nation in the region, if not around the world. Now we are talking about, or rather, they are talking about a protracted war, or war readiness. Does this reflect that Japan's defense policy is shifting from passive defense to active preparedness?
Well, like Mr. Warwick, I'm putting it in the context of the U.S. strategic the geopolitics in the region and sustaining the Wolfowitz and Brzezinski policy of maintaining the unipolar world, maintaining U.S. dominance all over the world, and in light of the United States shift to the Western Hemisphere for the meantime, they're shifting the responsibility to their Asian vassal states like the Philippines and Japan for preparation for their next proxy war. I am of the belief that the Americans want to bring down the global economy, starting with the Asian economy, in order to level the playing field for their restoration of U.S. hegemony. But I'd like to show you something. We have hit the ground running here in Manila. We have started an anti-Japan militarization movement. I'm wearing the shirt now. I hope you can see it.
Yes, it's very clear.
We launched this on April 1st, April 17, the commemoration date of the end of the Bataan Death March, to remind the Filipino public of the atrocities that the Japanese militarists are capable of. And we can see alarming signs that this neo-militarism is rising again in Japan. And ASEAN must really make an early alarm to warn its peoples about this. I think ASEAN has been too polite and too nice to Japan. I think we should already start, and we are starting that in Manila with a coalition of 3 movements to try to start the ball running on the protest movements here in consonance with we're seeing protests in Japan. So I think the 3 documents are now clearly seen in the actions of the Japanese government, talking about possessing nuclear weapons, installing missiles in the south of Japan that can reach China, and so on. So I think we must really sound the alarm.
We must sound the alarm. Xiyu, of course, what is more alarming probably is the Japanese policy on nuclear weapons, not a current one, but they talked about attempt, what they are going to do. Some have noticed that, Takaichi has indicated an intention to reconsider the no introduction of nuclear weapons principle within the 3 non-nuclear principles, which are no possession, no production, and no introduction of nuclear weapons in Japan. If that principle were to be reconsidered, what would it mean in practical terms? How let's say, alarming is it to the rest of the region, let's say?
Well, it's a really challenging and dangerous move from Japan. You mentioned the three principles of non-nuclear, and now they dare to revise one of the three principles. For example, revise the principle of no introduction. And on the surface, revising from the no introduction to allowing introduction has only a partial revision of the three. However, the first revision will certainly lead to further revisions, and gradually the three principles of no nuclear will be revised or removed, and then Japan will become a nuclearized country from the no-nuclearized country. So this is a very dangerous and a worrisome starting point. That is the starting point, but not the last point. So at the very beginning, the move or reconsider has alarmed the international community, especially the neighboring countries with Japan.
Warwick, so this is the first step toward a full revision of this nuclear principle, the three principles there. So, I mean, basically, you can imagine Japan in terms of having nuclear weapons or installing nuclear weapons in the island. So, of course, I mean, that means a huge damage to regional peace and stability.
Look, it would definitely be a significant blow to regional peace and stability. It's also a blow to efforts to promote non-proliferation at a global level. We've already seen the watering down and the withdrawal or the refusal of the Americans to extend non-proliferation agreements with the Russians, even if it was only for a 12-month period, subject to further negotiations. And the paradox or the irony at the moment is that the war against Iran was in part ostensibly initiated by the Americans out of concerns about the Iranian nuclear program. So what we're starting to see is a progressive falling apart, if you will, of the hard-earned non-proliferation arrangements that progressively came into effect in the 1990s. And that will lead to increased risks across the region. But I think it's important to also take half a step back. Before the Japanese government even gets there, there is the reality that not every Japanese citizen supports this particular course of action. No doubt there are substantial numbers of people in Japan who hold to the views of Japanese remilitarization and also perhaps are concerned about the regional security environment in which Japan finds itself, particularly as a result of the reduced dependability of the Americans these days. But there are many Japanese people who understand deeply the follies of militarization and the need to advocate for regional peace and for Japan to uphold its pacifist constitution that has actually held Japan, broadly speaking, in good stead over the course of the last 80 years. And we need to give support to people in Japan who actually understand that this pathway, the militarization pathway, is not good for Japan and it's not good for Asia either.
But Warwick, the question, I think the issue people have concern about this move or the approach by Takaichi government is, her rather radical approach to pursue swift changes of the Japanese defense policies. Some of the changes were achieved without a proper even the parliamentary procedure or the question by the opposition party. A lot of somehow the people were ignored or were putting aside while the government is focusing on remilitarization. I mean, that practice itself, at least you can say, there's a lack of transparency, lack of a proper discussion. As you said, the Japanese people, majority of them probably are against, this approach of remilitarization, given what happened during World War II. But still, this is what's happening.
Look, absolutely, Chindor. The approaches that have been adopted to pursue the kinds of changes that we are talking about here tonight also involve the hollowing out of due process, which basically means that parliamentary oversight, or the oversight of the Japanese Diet, has been bypassed, and that the only thing that's left in place now is essentially the ability of the executive to make capricious decisions without engagement with the people of the country, and ultimately deliver not much more than after the event reporting. None of this breeds confidence in the sustainability or in fact the legitimacy of this particular direction of strategic rethinking. If the administration actually had confidence that the pathway that it was trying to head down at the moment actually held strong and sustainable popular support and legitimacy, given the fact that Takaichi won the recent election resoundingly, this is not the pathway that an administration would go down. This is a sneaky attempt to water down Japan's historic pacifist position and a military posture that was actually designed to support Japanese defense, not to enable Japanese aggression across Asia.
Well, Herman Laurel, Japan is also considering revising the Self-Defense Forces Act to allow the transfer of surplus defense equipment overseas, including potentially lethal weapons under certain conditions. This, plus the lifting of restrictions of arms export, means probably more weapons made in Japan will be available, will be in the markets of Southeast Asian countries. I mean, this is not a welcoming move toward peace, obviously.
Well, it's very clear, at least from the perspective of the Philippines, that we're being made a dumping ground of a lot of Japanese war equipment right now. And as you said, this is not in any way serving the cause of peace. Apparently, Japan is already on the way towards creating a crisis and tension in our region for its master state, the United States of America. And I think this is very clear to us here in the Philippines. And part of this problem is we are also being pushed to be a frontline state as Japan is in this tension-building escalation in the region. But I'd like to point out that the Japanese justification that we read and opinion writers express justification for militarizing is the threat from other Asian countries with nuclear weapons. That is, of course, a big myth. If North Korea has nuclear weapons, it is to defend against the United States of America. If China has nuclear weapons, it is to defend against the United States of America and not against Japan. Japan has been served very well by its peace constitution, and therefore its population is not very supportive of this shift to war machinery that Japan is already undergoing.
Right. The question now is, whether Japan will become, a weapon provider in this region. I'm saying this because, Japanese Defense Minister Koizumi is reportedly scheduled to visit the Philippines and Indonesia next month to hold talks on the export of second-hand defense equipment. Obviously, the lifting of restrictions on arms export, second-hand weapons, and of course surplus weapons. It's all about military weapons here. This is obviously changing the image of Japan, of being like a peace nation. Obviously, is becoming a seller of lethal weapons.
Well, I think the key does not lie in exporting second-hand or first-hand non-lethal or lethal weapons. The key lies in they are beginning to export weapons. with the gradual process, Japan will gradually become greater and greater providers, as you mentioned, suppliers of arms to the world market. And what does it mean? That means 2 points. Firstly, Japan will build up their own independent defense industries, and the more exports means the more production capabilities for their weapon production, and the stronger productivity of their defense industry. That means the stronger military forces in Japan. So such a cycling will really drive Japan systematically towards the remilitarization, both for export production and their military forces build-ups.
Mm-hmm. Well, Xiyu, we know that not long ago the Japanese Prime Minister talked about, if there's a contingency in across the Taiwan Strait, somehow that means a survival situation for Japan, and indicating there will be a Japanese military intervention in the Chinese process of national reunification. Now, plus the Japanese rapid militarization. What is their purpose? Are they trying to challenge, trying to disrupt the Chinese, national reunification here?
Yes, actually, the re-rising of Japanese military capabilities is really challenging to Asia, the neighboring areas of Japan, but fundamentally challenging to China, especially the unification of China. You mentioned the remarks by the Prime Minister earlier. That remarks really reflects the Japanese right-wing's mindset. Say, the Japanese right-wings always regard the neighboring country as the so-called lifeline. Before World War II, they regard the Japanese lifeline as Mongolia and Manchuria. And based on the mindset, say, Mongolia, if there's something happened in Mongolia or Manchuria, that is a crisis or challenge to their lifeline. So they have a right to intervene. Now they change their focus, say, okay, Taiwan is their lifeline. Therefore, they made the remark, say, something happened in Taiwan, that means the crisis, survival crisis for Japan. Such remarks really reflects the mindset remain unchanged from the early last century to the century of the 21st. So based on such dangerous mindset with their military build-ups, I'm really worried about the future of Japan, the future of China's security, the future of the Asian countries' security, simply because Japan remain insisting on their aggression mindset, and also re-rising of their military capabilities, combined their mindset and their military build-ups, that will compose a systematic challenges for Asian community, for the regional security and stabilities.
Mm-hmm. Well, Herman Laurel, of course, we are comparing pre-war Japanese actions, the practices, saying lifeline, which it was used or is used probably as an excuse to launch military operations, military actions against neighboring countries, against China, South Korea, for example. I mean, now there's a deficit of trust, of course, the lack of trust, let's say, neighboring countries have in Japan. People would say they didn't apologize properly, officially, if you compare their action with Germany in particular. So, given this evolving security posture, plus the historical background, and probably we should have every reason to be alarmed and to be vigilant about the Japanese engagement in terms of militarization here.
Yes. Well, there is very good reason to be alarmed, to be very concerned, to be anxious about what is happening now to the Japanese defense strategies. And unfortunately, they have had decades of soft power in the Philippines at least. And it's very hard it's not easy to remind the population about the atrocities that occurred under the Japanese and the danger of the rise of neo-militarism among the political rightists in Japan. That brings the danger of a proxy war, reviving the Nixon doctrine of let Asians fight the Asians under the present circumstances to disrupt the rise of Asia, the rise of China, the rise of ASEAN in the context of the United States' desire to reassert itself in the region and all over the world.
Right. Warwick, usually if you look in the history or recent practice, usually Japan follows the Washington's policy on Asia, on China in particular. But now Japan is becoming increasingly active in terms of military engagement, with some of the countries like the Philippines and also including Australia. Is Japan somehow leading Washington in terms of their Asian policy, in terms of their containment of China?
Look, I think the way to look at this is to understand that, in fact, what's happening is the confluence of a number of allied interests. Obviously, Washington's own interests have always been focused around containment of China and the utilisation of the resources of allied states in and around the region, whether they're client states like Japan or former colonies like the Philippines, or, of course, sub-imperial allies like Australia. And in Japan itself, there has been, of course, a thread within Japanese political culture focused very much on Japanese remilitarization. So when you bring both of these aspirations together, you literally get what we are seeing today, which is Japanese remilitarization to fill a capabilities gap as a result of the hollowing out of America's own ability to project deterrence in the region. This suits both the United States and Japan at the same time. The concern for the region, of course, is that Japan has form. It has never properly atoned for the atrocities that it committed for many decades right across Asia, both in North Asia and into Southeast Asia, all the way, I might add, to Australia, where Japan attacked the northern city of Darwin and delivered a mini-submarine into Sydney Harbour. So Japan has form. It is something that people across the region need to be wary about. The other thing to be concerned about is the absence of any real strategic thinking. This is bad theory at work. The idea of deterrence will actually ultimately catalyse a security dilemma. It will actually lead to a regional arms race, which is not in anybody's interests. Ultimately, Japan's strategy is based on an entirely unrealistic assessment of the situation. War games undertaken by American think tanks and others actually have reached conclusions that, given America's reduced capabilities and Japan's limited capabilities, even with a ramp-up of production, the bases that exist are unlikely to survive past the first week. This is not the way to achieve peace and security for all concerned. What we need now is statecraft, not remilitarization.
Well, the lack of statecraft in Japan. On that, we come to the end of today's show. Many thanks to our guests. You can also find us on the CGTN app or on YouTube. I'm Xu Qinduo. Thanks for being with us. See you next time.